So thank you all for being here with us. I am so happy to be sharing the information that I've learned over 4 years of researching and writing the book that will be coming out in August, Never Enough, about achievement culture and when it becomes toxic and what we can do about it. The book is primarily talks about students, undergraduate students, students K through 12, and the rising expectations on how they should achieve, how often they should achieve, how high the bar is now as a young person, trying to figure out who they are while at the same time achieving at incredible, the competition that our kids are feeling is incredible. So before I get to mattering, maybe I just kind of talk about how I actually got to mattering in the first place. So for my book, I surveyed 6,500 parents. I surveyed 500 young adults, and I traveled all over the country, from Washington State to Maine to Texas to Wyoming to Tennessee, Florida, Ohio. And I was looking for who were the kids who were doing well despite the pressures in their environment. I'm sure if there are any parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles or friends of families with young people, you are probably seeing the rise of anxiety and depression. It's real. It's not that we've gotten better at detecting it, although that is true. It's that these rates have gotten worse. Mental health is worsening among young people to the point where young people are feeling as stressed and anxious for the first time as adults in the world. And by the way, adults are feeling increased levels of anxiety and stress. And this is where mattering comes in. So I was looking for who were the kids who were thriving in these communities. What did they have in common? What was school life like for them? What were their relationships like? What did parents focus on at home? What were their behaviors and habits? And what was their place in the larger community? And I found about 14 or so threads that these healthy achievers had in common. And I worked with a researcher at Harvard and at Baylor to sort of come up with a framework. I was looking for a framework to present my findings to parents. And I came across a psychological construct called mattering. Mattering has been around since the 1980s. It was originally conceptualized by the same researcher who brought us the concept of self-esteem. And what he found in the 80s was that kids who enjoyed a healthy level of self-esteem also felt like they mattered to their families. And the way he was defining mattering is that they felt significant to the world around them. In the decades since the 80s, there's been a growing interest in studying mattering. And the researchers who now sort of devote their time to it look at mattering as what they call a meta need, or an umbrella term that captures feelings of belonging, connection, mastery. So these are all things that are important for our kids to feel. They're also the same thing that's important for the adults in their lives to feel. And so anyway, I was introduced to mattering. It has completely changed my life. It has changed the way I look at my parenting. It's changed the way I interact in my marriage. It's changed my relationship with friends and colleagues. And we will get into that a little more, sort of the ingredients. We have a slide that, well, you can see in this first slide that mattering gets to the root of loneliness, burnout, anxiety, and depression. What researchers who study mattering find is that low levels of mattering, feeling like you are not valued by your family, by your friends, by your community, by your colleagues, and the idea of not being able to add meaningful value back to your family, to your friends, to your community. That is what leads to loneliness, burnout, anxiety, and depression. Mattering is also, the way I've come to see it, and the researchers look at it, is that mattering is an actionable way of increasing connection and also increasing the depth of the connection, which we'll talk about why that's so important, I'm sure, in a bit. But also, I have here mattering increases job satisfaction, motivation, and retention. And as we go on with this webinar, we'll do a working a survey that will measure your levels of mattering at work. And then also mattering motivates people. The way I talk about mattering is that it provides a healthy kind of fuel as opposed to a dirty fuel. So a dirty fuel might be leading by criticism or fear, or parenting with fear and criticism. That's what I call dirty fuel. It might get you to the short-term goal, but at some point that dirty fuel is going to clog up that person's engine, and they are going to burn out. They are going to leave. If they're a child, they are going to adopt what researchers and psychologists call a false self, which is not really who they are, but who they feel like they need to be in order to win the approval of their parents. So we'll get into all of these in our, I think, hour together. So Michael, where should we start?
So I, liked finding out, a bit of the history, and you wrote a Washington Post piece in 2019 on at-risk and group children. Do you want to tell us all a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this article was really the basis of my book. In 2019, like Michael said, I wrote an article for the Washington Post about the newest named at-risk group for children. So 2 national policy reports, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the National Academies. These are 2 very important research arms that help drive policy in our country. And they were naming the most at-risk groups of children. And they were children in poverty, children with incarcerated parents, children of recent immigrants, children living in foster care. And then there was a 5th group named for the first time, and it was kids who attend what researchers call high achieving schools. Those are public or private schools around the country where most of the students go on to graduate and go to 4-year colleges. Those schools have funding to offer rich extracurricular activities. They often have advanced placement or honors classes. And these kids who attend these schools, hundreds of them, thousands of them across the country, are now officially an at-risk group. And the researchers who study this population estimated that as many as 1 in 3 students are, under this definition, considered to be at risk for 2 to 6 times higher levels of clinical anxiety, clinical levels of depression, substance abuse disorder, and thoughts of suicide. So I'm also the mother of 3 teenagers who attend one of these competitive schools. And I wanted to know what I could do to buffer against that in my own home. And what I found as the solution is mattering. Mattering acts like a protective shield. The kids I met who were doing well despite the pressures, they were still anxious, they still had failures and setbacks, but they were able to bounce back because they believed at their core that they mattered, that their parents, that their peers, that their community valued them, that they had value that was not contingent on their performance. The kids who were doing the worst felt like their mattering was contingent on their performance, or they were never asked to give back in meaningful ways. They didn't feel depended on. They were only there to, living life to improve their resume because that's what their parents were prioritizing. And it's very hard to believe you matter without social proof that you do. And social proof is seeing how your strengths, what you do, can add meaningful value back to your family, to your coworkers, to your larger community. We as humans need social proof that we matter beyond words. We need the words, but then we also need to see the proof of our labor and our value.
So do you find that the construct of mattering is, generation specific, or obviously there should always be some variability? How would you describe, especially given we have a workplace that now extends, by our definition, sort of 4 generations or so of population.
Yeah, so mattering has only been studied since the 80s. So I can't really speak to generations, but I will say that what researchers are finding and what I saw in my own 4 years of studying this is that we are living in an environment that really eats away and erodes our mattering. And what I mean by that is, religion was never a full panacea, but before, in a generation past, religion for the most part gave us that sense of mattering for who we were at our core. Now, the majority of people don't go to services. They don't necessarily believe in God, particularly young adults, who are the most secular generation that we've ever had, or that we have ever had. What I believe is happening is that we have replaced religion with capitalism. And capitalism, you have to prove your worth. That's how you matter in a capitalistic society when you are adding to the bottom line. And who doesn't matter in a capitalistic society are young people who are not producers and retired people. And we are seeing real deficits in mattering. Also in workplaces that are, when I was writing that article for the Wall Street Journal, Elon Musk was firing people by locking them out of their work email accounts. That is a surefire way of telling people you don't matter. You are simply a cog in the machine. People who had devoted their lives and countless hours and personal lives to help create Twitter were now locked out of it. So actually what researchers call that is anti-mattering. It's not even that you have a low level of mattering. You're not sure how valued you are. You are being told loud and clear, you do not matter here. So we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of these anti-mattering environments. Our kids can feel them when they're, looking at decreasing rates of acceptances at specific colleges that maybe brag about how many kids they reject versus how many kids they accept. We have messages in the media and in social media about certain people mattering more, people who are better looking, who have more followers, who live in bigger houses. So young people and adults are getting these constant messages that certain people matter more than others. And as long as we live in a society where certain people matter more, all of our mattering is at risk because we are all vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
To feeling like we don't matter.
So I'd like to just make a sort of side and related comment relative to the last part, which is young people, which now might extend to early workers, employees, let's say up to age 25, are taking a lot of cues from the social media interactions, which are not, a part of their lives, but are arguably the dominant social format for young people interactions more than the playground or the after school. Mm-hmm. Just measured by, if one measured just by hours. Mm-hmm. So anybody with young people and their family can relate to that. And no matter what, I don't see any ability to change that. But there's some, so it just doesn't matter if we have an opinion, not to use the word matter, but it doesn't matter if we don't like it, or don't think it's good because we came from a generation, yes, where there were different things and our parents thought that our worlds were also problematic, etc. But so we're going to have to play in that world with them, and another thing I think it's relevant, just contextually, is the vast majority, maybe the exclusive domain and content types of the social our media environments is the self.
Mhm.
So every piece of content pretty well, I would say every piece, that's not right. A lot of the content is, look at me, look at my lifestyle, look at the great things, here's this cool thing. And of course, there is lots of cool things that they do. So it's not all purely about bikinis and what have you, but it still is always self. But mattering, I think, isn't that the other direction?
So mattering is, it's both. So mattering is both, and you need to be able to add value to yourself. You need to care about yourself, but you need to balance that with caring for others. So it is not, so to fully matter means that you matter to yourself, that you matter to your family, that you matter to your larger community, and that you're adding value back to yourself, to your family, to your larger community. If we were just to be adding value without adding value to ourselves, we would burn out. We would really not be a great source of support to anyone. And that actually makes me think about the most surprising finding in my research. I was stunned by this, but the number one intervention, whether you have any at-risk child, any child in distress, the number one intervention, according to decades worth of resilience research, is to first make sure the primary caregiver, most often the mother, but the primary caregiver, make sure her well-being, her support system is intact, because a child's resilience rests on a caregiver's resilience, and a caregiver's resilience rests on the depth of the relationships in their lives. So in my book, the first sort of solution to the book is to make sure, as caregivers, or as, people, just like caregivers, people who are caregivers in an office, people who are leading, you need to make sure that your mattering, your resilience, your well-being is intact, so that therefore your others in your life can depend on you, can rest on you. And so it really forced me to reprioritize my life, because the messages we get as parents in a society, particularly mothers, and increasingly fathers, is that, your needs matter. To be a parent was always to put your children first, but to put your child first every minute of every day, which is what, what society is now sort of trying to demand in us with the rise of intensive parenting. It's not serving parents, and it's not serving our kids. It's breaking down resilience. So, if we were to bring that into the workplace, what I found in my research, and I visited workplaces, manufacturing plants, that if the adults in children's lives spend 8 to 10 hours a day in an office environment where they are made to feel like they don't matter, or that they don't matter that much, it is very hard after 8 to 10 hours to show up and be the first responder to your child's concerns. So in order to help the child, we really need to help the adults in their lives. And to do that, we need to help create mattering workplaces, because that's what will build resilience. That's what will, as we talk about, job satisfaction, retention, and actually the bottom line.
For those, maybe we'll get a book reference of a must read for all serious HR professionals. Jennifer, you'll help me, not only, of course, your book when it comes out in August, everybody. So just a reminder, we will collect the information. We won't let you down. We will get that out to you all when we, of course, get copies of it. But expectations will be, this is probably going to be September or so. What's the Dipper and Filler's book that we all were supposed to read when we were young? Does everybody remember that children's book where you were either a dipper or a filler? And
that's right. That's the blanking on his name. He was the Gallup survey. He created a wonderful survey of strengths And actually, one of the things that I would love to talk about in here, yeah, it's the bucket dipper or the bucket filler, and I'm blanking on his name. He was an
We'll come to
extraordinary
that.
man.
Feel free to use the Q&A session if anybody can remember the title of that kids' books, What Kind of Person Are You? Okay, so let's take some of this expertise and perspective and put it into real world situations. And that is, we start with our team or department within an organization. We might have a sphere of influence of 20, 30, 40, 50, and we have a responsibility because we've taken, this forward, and this idea that says we need to help people feel that they matter, partly to affect the company-centric world. But interestingly and dimensionally, you've given it another layer, which is, and remember, all of those people go home and things happen, as we all know, and things are either repeated one way or another. So what are some of the either use cases or thoughts or practical applications that we could dig into? And again, if the audience would like to use the QA session for the second part, we'll sort of open up a little bit of the QA. I'll have one of my team moderate it to see if we can not, get it out of control, but also allow, some of the audience to interact, participate with Jennifer. But Jennifer, over to you about, what are some of your, recommendations?
So let's go to the next slide where we talk about the ingredients of mattering. That's the one, Charles, with a lot of words on it. Yep. Okay. So this is from Gordon Flett, who is one of the leading researchers on mattering. Gordon Flett is well known for creating with a colleague the perfectionism scale. And what he was finding about perfectionism, and there is a rise in perfectionism among adults, young adults and children. What he was finding was that mattering was a way to help prevent perfectionism and also a way to help curb it. But back to here. So what does it mean to matter? What does it mean? It means that people actually give you attention, that you don't feel invisible. We all know that feeling, right? You go to a cocktail party, imagine yourself walking into a cocktail party and you don't know anybody, and the host introduces you to someone who has met you 10 times before, but they never remember you. And so they put out their hand to introduce you, and you think to yourself, wow, I just do not matter to this person. They will never remember me. Then imagine, 30 seconds later, someone from across the room is waving to you frantically, and they're making their way through the crowd, and they come to you and they say, thank you so much for that advice you gave me the other day. It has really changed my relationship with my coworker. It's something that I'm applying to my family. Thank you so much for that. That is feeling like you matter. You have added value and someone has recognized your value. So the first element is attention, just not being invisible. People saying your name when you go into the office. People asking about details of your life, seeing you as a person, not just a colleague. Importance. So it's feeling that you are someone who is significant. Somebody who, would be, we'll get to this, noted absence, someone who would be missed when they're not there. Dependence. People actually rely on you. You matter so much and you add value to your organization or to your department. Ego extension. That's just a fancy way of saying that other people are invested in your well-being. So when you're going through something hard, other people are empathic. They feel it with you. They're going through it with you. Noted absence, we talked about, just the idea of being missed. Appreciation, feeling that you and your actions are valued and they matter. And that is obviously through words that we feel appreciated. And individuation, and that's just, again, letting people know that you see them as a person and not just a cog in the machine. That there is something unique about you and different. And on that little individuation idea. So I don't know if anybody here has heard about the VIA survey, VIA survey, Values in Action survey. It's free. You can Google it, VIA survey. It was created by two of the fathers of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, and who's at Penn, and Christopher Peterson, who was at Michigan, but he passed away. It's like a 10 to 15-minute quiz, and it will tell you what your natural strengths are. And why is that important? Because that is how you feel as an individual. If you can approach your obstacles and your struggles by tapping into a strength, that's how you overcome them. There's also a VIA survey for kids, and I did this with our entire family. And they name, I can't remember because I did it a few years ago. It's either 3 or 5 of your character strengths. And my daughter, who was in 7th grade at the time, there was drama at the lunchroom table. And I said to her, which of these strengths could you use to overcome that obstacle? And one of the strengths was humor. And so that's what she did. And she's known for her sense of humor. She's able to, to break tension when it comes up in the lunchroom. But those are, those are the elements, the components to mattering. I thought it would be fun for you to see a couple. If we could go to the next slide, you could see how researchers study mattering. This is just a 5-question. You could give this to your spouse or someone in your life. It's on a scale from 1 to 4, 1 being a lot, 4 being not at all. So 1 is, how much do others depend on you? And this is, again, subjective. Mattering is subjective. It's not objective. So it's how much you feel that others depend on you. Next question, how much do other people pay attention to you? The next one, how important do you feel you are to other people? And how much do you feel others would miss you if you went away? And then the last question, how interested are people generally in what you have to say? So again, if you think about those elements, there are practical implications. How much do people pay attention to you? Do you know everybody in your department's name? Do you know when their birthday is? Do you know if there's a milestone that they're celebrating? My husband works at this really large corporation, and his CEO sings happy birthday to him every birthday. And he's been there for 22 years. And every birthday on his voicemail is a happy birthday from his CEO, who also happens to be Steve Schwarzman, who's a billionaire and who has lots of people that he apparently sings happy birthday to.
I want the job.
It's a good, right? It's a good thing. How much do other people pay attention to you? That's just, you're going and you're getting a cup of coffee in the coffee room, and you make eye contact and you just ask people how they're doing. It's just letting people know they matter to you. When your child, when somebody is absent, it's letting them know they were missed. And the last one, how interested are people generally in what you have to say? There are many opportunities we have as colleagues it does not take that much time to listen to what other people have to say. It really doesn't. And boy, does it go a long way to just spend a few minutes listening and asking people what they're thinking, what's their thought on this project or that project, particularly around work that impacts their own jobs. It's really just a matter of civility. There's one other quiz that I thought would be fun for everybody to take themselves. And this is the Mattering at Work scale. So if you have a piece of paper and a pencil and you want to take this, I'll tell you what the scores mean. Again, you would rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being you strongly disagree, 5, you strongly agree to these statements. So the first question is, my work contributes to my organization's success. So on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you agree to that statement? The next one is, the quality of my work makes a real impact on my organization. My work influences my organization's functioning. My organization praises my work publicly. My coworkers praise my work. I am well known for the quality of my work in my organization. And finally, my work has made me popular at my workplace. So take a minute, if you did do the survey, and add up the first three and the last four. So add up the first three and the last four. And then if we could go to the next slide, I'll tell you what it means. Okay, so if in the first three questions, your score was 13 or above, it would be considered exceptionally high. And in the last four questions, if you were above 15, it would be exceptionally high. And what does that mean? Higher scores on this scale, as measured by how strongly you agree to these statements, correlate with more promotions, more raises, and lower turnover. So anyway, I think it's an interesting, HR people might consider adding something like this to an employee survey to see which employees might be at risk of leaving, and which employees are feeling recognized and appreciated and valued. One of the questions that someone submitted to us was, how much does loneliness in the workplace cost businesses annually? So the reason I think that the person asked about loneliness is loneliness and low feelings of mattering are correlated. So if you feel like you don't matter, you will likely feel lonely at the office. And I was surprised to read this statistic, but Cigna did a survey and they found that 65% of entry-level workers and 70% of senior executives report feeling that no one knows them well, that they are lonely. Those are synonyms for not really mattering that much. And they asked someone asked, what's the bottom line figure for all this loneliness? What does it cost companies? Well, Cigna estimated $154 billion a year in stress-related absenteeism. So mattering isn't just important for employee flourishing, it's also important for retention and for the bottom line.
I want to also, jump in, and again, apologies if some of you, if I'm being repetitive for some of you who've attended some of these prior presentations. There was a study that we underwrote with Dr. Rick Garlick. He was a presenter several sessions ago. And we looked at one of our clients in the healthcare, 50,000 lives over a 3-year period of time. And the link between the activities in a program we built for them, recognition, feedback, praise, telling people that they matter, just in a format and construct that could be tracked, yielded the following outcome. If you had not been recognized within the first 6 months at some level of consistency and told that you matter, you were 70% more likely to voluntarily turn over than your co-workers. I'll, share a couple of, perspectives on that. The first is that it happened. So clearly the linkage between telling people that they matter and the behaviors, in this case, walking out the door, is direct and consequential. The second is the cost for replacement and the damage done to the business for that population alone was estimated, I believe in the study, was some 20 million, or please forgive me if that's not correct. For those that are interested, you can get a copy of that study from the website. It's up there if you wanted to use that as a case to support, what we're talking about today, and that is you got to tell people that are mattering. I think my final just point, relative to that illustration is, without some kind of measuring system in place to know whether these things are happening, the survey activity is, it's not irrelevant. It's just going to say, oh, it's 12:45, and that's the end. It's 12:45. Okay, that's 12:46. Meaning, you've got to have something in place that would allow you to baseline the data, not just on what people are feeling, but are people doing anything that's causing the feelings to change? Without that, you actually have a ship with no rudder. It's going, but nobody really knows whether it's getting better or it's getting worse or what's measurable or otherwise. All right, sorry, Jennifer, I didn't want to interrupt you if you were rolling on to another point. I thought I'd just...
No, that was great. In my article on the power of mattering at work, just to go off on what you were saying, is that there are, to roll out mattering in the workplace is possible and necessary, and you can be systematic about it. You could create principles that we are a company that recognizes our employees. We know when their birthdays are. We track important dates to them. One of the things that actually I think is really useful, and the company, I'm blanking on the name of the company that does this. I'll think of it in a second. BetterUp. They have they were putting out a model that helped managers figure out how they could communicate to employees their value to the company. So by literally showing, so I went to a manufacturing plant. This is a good example. I went to a manufacturing plant in Wisconsin that is run by Barry Waymiller, which is a manufacturing company in St. Louis. And I went to the floor of the factory, and I saw these really interesting posters that were up by each station of the factory. And on the poster, it was where that, so each section of the factory would be working on a different part. They created paper machines that put out paper. And each station had a letter about where that machine was going, what it was going to do, and a photo of the salesperson on the other end who was going to receive that machine. So they personalized it for the person working at that station. Here's where what you're doing is going to contribute to creating the machine that will then go to this company, that will then create newspapers. And they sort of plotted where that person fit on the continuum. And that delivered mattering, right? These union workers knew that they were part of a bigger whole. They were not just cogs in a machine. It was personalized. They saw their value in black and white. And I will tell you, it's transformative. I loved my visit to this plant. It was extraordinary to see what not so much effort can do to make people feel like they matter. And nobody leaves that company because of it.
So one of the questions that had come in was the relationship or the construct between, is this recognition, i.e. my organization praises my work publicly, or my co-workers praise my work, or is recognition maybe a insufficient definition alone, and mattering, the way in which one conveys mattering? What are examples in workplaces beyond, putting up posters on them, where one can convey? And is that recognition, or is recognition a part of it, but there are other elements to it?
I think there are other elements to it. So I think recognition is an important part of it. It is, it's one of these 7 questions that were praised publicly, recognized publicly. I think another way of expressing that an employee matters is gratitude. And, gratitude, researchers who study it call it a relationship glue. It is being grateful to someone for their work means that you recognize their value. And then by expressing it to somebody, you show them that you're a good relationship partner, and it creates this upward spiral in the relationship. So recognizing somebody's work and thanking them for it and being grateful out loud is the glue of relationships.
So if one were, again, trying to take a few systematic steps along a path, and everybody, I would assume on this call, have had some experience, working within corporate America as a, provider or as an employee. The words recognition exist, everybody, I know we have a recognition thing, we do recognition. But the outcomes or the results don't intimate that whatever is being done is really working effectively. Again, if the survey results and your Gallup poll is telling you doing great, vast majority of organizations we're dealing with still seems to produce a consequential gap between what leadership thinks is happening and in place versus what the sort of survey results are, articulating. So there's a big gap. Any thoughts about how people may approach, probing that, closing the gap, particularly maybe at the front line, first tier sort of management layers where most of the activities taking place, designed in the ivory tower, right? But the actuality at the front line is not really happening.
I mean, I think the mattering framework works for all relationships. I don't think it, I know it, and research has shown it. So the same framework you could bring to your family and to your children is the same framework you could bring to your office. And so instead of, solving for employee happiness, solve for employee mattering. And what do I mean by that is, does that employee feel valued? Do they feel valued by their colleagues? Then are they shown where they are adding value? Are you explicit with them? Show them. People are energized and motivated when they see what their output is, how they connect to the larger whole. So I think what I would do if I were just learning about mattering for the first time, I would start thinking about each person that I work with and do they feel like they matter? It's pretty intuitive. You don't need a PhD to show people that they matter. That's what I love about it. That's what I love about mattering. It's accessible. It is obviously relational. To me, it is belonging and connection in action. It's actionable. So you want somebody to feel like they belong, recognize their work, thank them for it, tell them explicitly how much you value them, how important they are, how much they'd be missed if they weren't here, how much they're contributing. And so to me, what is so magical about mattering, right, is that you can dial it up. Unlike belonging and connection, which are not so obvious to dial up, mattering you can dial up.
Have you got any sort of favorite vehicles or methodologies for conveying at scale an approach like that?
Well, unfortunately, there have been academic books written about mattering, but no commercial book written about mattering for adults in the workplace. Something I'm working on right now. So I will have it to you, but I do not currently have it. But I don't think it would be that hard to operationalize it. And there are companies like Goldman Sachs that I interviewed for my Wall Street Journal article that are looking to do that, looking to operationalize mattering because they know how important it is for workplace well-being. So I don't have the how to just yet, but I don't think you don't need a PhD. I think I think all of us could sort of figure this out, but I will operationalize it for you. I just haven't done it yet.
All right. Well, before I, make an added comment, I want to let everybody know a few just sort of reminders. One, if you have a question you'd like to ask or pose in the last couple of minutes, we'll feel free to enter one, and we'll do our best to have Jenna respond. If not, for those that had submitted some good questions and we didn't feel like we covered them, we'll certainly send out something as a follow-up. Somebody had asked about the presentation deck being sent out, and Jennifer's great questions. And with your permission, Jennifer, would like to do that. Of course, there'll be a copy of this webinar recorded that'll be available for people to come and have a look if you weren't able to attend. On this list of activities that we're talking about, and the juxtaposition of the opening part of our conversation where we talked about the devil incarnate, so to speak, it's actually also the opportunity to do systematic delivery. It's not the tool, and I find in some conversations, even questions, people are mistaking the tool for the delivery of the content and the experience that's happening. They get fixated by, does the button on the left press and go here versus does it go upside down? And can you integrate it into what's a McCall thing or a G or the other thing, all of which are relevant, but they're missing the big point, which is in order to systematize mattering at scale, you've got to establish a framework by which mattering is a priority or given some attention versus a lip service, right? So like, HR, this whatever. And you got to go, no, it's consequential. And here's the data to support it. Interestingly, we probably got a new perspective, or at least I did. I don't know if people can relate to, and that is people do go home and people do take the whiplashing home with them if that's what they got. Conversely, if they got praised and appreciated. There isn't a person on the planet who doesn't like appreciation, whether you're the factory worker, or working at retail, or you're on the airplane. I practice loving just telling the stewardesses what a great job they did at the end of the flight. You could just feel the air, change. But anyway, the point being, without some kind of technology and tool to support your mattering initiatives will only go so far as your presentation is read and the number of people listened, and heard it, and maybe it lasts for a little bit with some resonance. In order to develop something systematic, you're going to need the help of technology, because the world is connected and they're in different time zones and there are different places around the world and it's different scale. Of course, the beauty is that that tool can then allow for systematic and scale and automated. And that's not even getting into the conversation about what happens when we help with ChatGPT generated recognition posts for promotions. That'll be a topic for another day where we'll be sharing, with some view about the impact of, AI generated content in this kind of world. But birthdays, promotions, anniversaries, private recognition, public recognition, team recognition aligned with values, connecting to your onboarding process, connecting to your well-being program, connecting to your D&I program, to anybody that's under the age of 30 or 40, if you're not delivering that in some intelligent digital mobile format, it's like me sending you guys faxes to invite you to this webinar. Yeah, maybe some of you might come. All right, couple of minutes left. Paul Tarquinio asked, what about folks that work independently? Colleagues don't know what they do. Right? So rating might not be realized. How do we, have some employees that call in and don't feel that you want to, what do we do within that construct of remote, which all of us are dealing with? How are we going to bring that to life?
I have seen that, and I have seen how it really negatively impacts well-being with a friend of mine who started, a new job remotely, and people don't know or necessarily understand the depth of her job, and she does not feel valued. I would say just as important as feeding mattering is to look for signs of anti-mattering in the environment. So if you're working at a company where people in your department don't know what you're doing, that's not, that's an obvious glaring gap for mattering. That's sort of bordering on an anti-mattering environment. That it's, I think it's obviously the supervisor's role to explain to people what everybody's doing. But I will also say there was a study that was recently released about nurses, and it was looking at mattering in nursing, mattering at work. And the researchers found that recognition by colleagues, by coworkers, was just as valued, if not more, than recognition by a supervisor. So, that just if you're working in that remote environment, find your colleagues. Don't wait for people to show your value to the team.
All right. Well, on behalf of everybody at WorkProud and the attendees on today's webinar, or those that will listen to this at a future state of recording, thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that knowledge and expertise and your passion for the topic. We'll all be excited to see that book come out. And of course, everybody, I think I've told you, we'll get the details out to everybody for registering to get a copy of it when we get them. As a heads up, next presentation, I believe, is later in June. We'll probably take a little pause, July, over the holidays. And we have the former CEO of United Airlines, who's going to be coming and sharing some of his perspectives on building teams, cultures that matter, and helping United on its journey and as it transformed. Look out for that information. That'll be a pretty interesting high-level presentation. We hope you can all attend. Feel free to invite some of your colleagues that you think might be interested in these. Remembering this is a great and interesting format for sharing knowledge and expertise and meeting some great authors. Again, in the case of the CEO, he's releasing a book, and that will also be available. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and a rest of the month of June. We'll talk to you later in the month. And thank you again, Jennifer. Great to have you as part of the WorkProud group.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.